going back to my role as a member on the Breaking Barriers Advisory Committee, I am so committed to this organization and its success because of how it has changed the trajectory of my career and how it has transformed how we offer services in Solano County. And definitely wanted to lift up the working paper that was led by Breaking Barriers because it is a roadmap for how to do this work. How do you come together in an integrated system and create this ecosystem that supports all of our young people in a timely fashion? So, anyone in here not heard of the ecosystems working paper? I don't see very many hands, but there's a few. It's on the Breaking Barriers website. Download it. I keep copies of it. I revisit it. I've read it many times, but it's a compass for me. It's a way of reconnecting and always ensuring that I am on the right track, because there's so many ways that we can get thrown off and moved in different directions, but it is a way to keep me centered and to keep my staff centered. And now this next slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because so many of my colleagues, this was pulled directly from the working paper, but many of our colleagues over the last day and a half have already spent a lot of time discussing the components necessary to operationalize the building of this ecosystem. The one thing that I definitely want to lift up is the inclusion of our youth and our families and being intentional about it. I had a whole plan on how I was going to present today, but because I was able to be here yesterday and hear from these amazing young people in our communities, I've made tweaks and changes to how I'm going to even proceed today. Their voices matter. They know exactly what needs to be done. We need to listen, and we need to ensure that we provide opportunities for them throughout the process, from the very beginning all the way through to the outcomes. Yes, thank you. So that's what I would lift out of that particular slide. So I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about stories. We were here to work. We're here to talk about the it. How are we going to get it done, whatever that is? And so I started coming to this conference back in 2018. And when I came the first couple of times, it was, myself and maybe a couple of individuals from Solano County. And I was able to make the connections and start to develop the relationships necessary to continue to do this work. We had behavioral health partners that we were developing our relationships with. And as a result, in 2019, we were sitting in this space, much fewer people at that time, and we had breakout rooms. And we had the poster boards, markers, Post-it notes, and we sat and had lunch together. We had multiple breakout sessions during that time, and we started to dream together. What do we want our communities to look like in Solano County, and what are we willing to do to get there? And that was the seed for what I'm going to be talking about. One of the outcomes of that discussion was that we sat down and looked at the data from our youth. And our young people were telling us, we need a space on campus where we can go, and they said, and chill. Get away from the stress of the classroom or whatever's happening on social media. We don't necessarily want clinicians or therapists. We want caring adults, and we want a space. And so because of that, we launched an initiative in partnership with different partners, but most importantly, Solano County Behavioral Health. And over the course of 2020, 2019, 2020, during the pandemic, we opened 50 wellness centers, 50, starting with a 5 pilot trial run with one district that was willing to step up and say, we'll be the pilot, we'll try this. And it was so successful that we started getting other districts and other LEAs saying, we want a wellness center. Can you share with us how we can get that going? And so now we have wellness centers in our juvenile detention facilities in every pod. We have wellness centers in our adult schools, at our community college, and K-12. Not every school, but we're getting there. And the data that we were able to capture through this process shows that our young people were happy to have the space. They were utilizing the space in an appropriate way. They were receiving services in a timely fashion. We were able to build a continuum of support for them. And we're continuing to do that work and adding additional wellness centers, but we're normalizing the conversation around mental health and creating spaces that are safe for every student. Now we're at a point where the adults are saying, we need a wellness center. So we're working with partners now to transform the old staff lounge areas into wellness spaces. How are we taking care of the individuals that take care of our young people? So, all coming from breaking barriers and those relationships. One of the other things that we discussed in 2018, was the alarming number of youth that were expressing suicidal ideation. We identified a need to establish a uniform approach for how we were going to respond in a mental health crisis, because we were all doing things differently, didn't have systems to collect the accurate data. How were we going to allow site administrators and school mental health staff to not have to stop and address the crisis because they still have other students that they needed to serve that day? And as you know, when there's a crisis, that can totally change your schedule for the day. And there are young people that are maybe needing a lower tier of service that may be overlooked that day because there are crises that the site administrators and staff were addressing. We also recognized that our community, parents in the community, were saying, we don't want police officers to be the individuals to come out and respond when my child is having a mental health crisis, because that's not their role. That's not how they were trained necessarily. And we were over relying on our school resource officers and police officers to do all of the responses. And we also, as I had mentioned, we wanted to identify trends, but you can't identify trends and analyze data if you're not all collecting data in the same ways, and there's not a place to actually store that data, and there's not a group dedicated to analyzing the data once you have it. So that was 2018. But we drew a picture, literally a poster, of what our utopian response would look like to crises so that we could address some of those areas. And so what we did was we applied for the Mental Health Student Service Act grant. And it was 2020, in January. Behavioral health partners were sitting in my office. We were all huddled around a desk, typing, emailing, sharing information, because we wrote that grant as a collaboration. And we were awarded. And then what happened in March of 2020, once we found out, yay, we've got the funding, we're ready to go? The pandemic. And what we did was we spent our time wisely. We created the system. It actually, the silver lining for the pandemic was that we were able to slow down a bit and start talking about all of the different components that needed to come into play in order for this to be a successful launch. We had time to round back with law enforcement to establish protocols. We identified who key partners are and individuals that were not in the space. We created forms and information for our school community. And so you can see that there is information there on school-based mobile crisis and the team specifically designed for teachers. What do teachers need to know? There was also information that went out to parents and the community about this change. And there was specific information and training that we were able to do with each one of the administrative teams, the clinical teams, and any other staff, clerical staff, staff at the school sites who needed to know about this new process. Now, when we wrote the grant in 2019, early 2020, based on the data that we had, which I told you was sketch, 45 to 60 calls was what we thought we would be providing each year. 45 to 60 calls based on the data that we had. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that for the 21-22 school year, when schools reopened after COVID, we had 252 calls. 252 calls for service. 22-23, it was 235. 23-24, 206. And for the first quarter of this year, 103. But I also want you to note the different colors on that chart. And the dark blue represents the number of youth that were actually placed on a hold and had to be transported. But the overwhelming majority of them are youth that we were able to create a safety plan, work with the school team, and ensure that the child received the services and supports that they needed, which includes things like reaching out with the parent to ensure that that child is seen by their provider immediately. Because when parents would pick up the phone, sometimes the providers would say, okay, great, we have an appointment in 5 weeks. And we were able to get them seen that day, the next day, or very shortly after. We also worked with families around ensuring that they had lock boxes for their weapons, ensuring that the teachers received the information, not necessarily all of the details, but just understanding that this is a young person that is struggling right now. How are we going to come together as a school community and hold this young person as they go through this process? But we were able to divert the majority. Usually it's about 75 to 80% of the young people are able to be held in our community and deferred from the hospital or the crisis stabilization unit. And that was huge, because our young people were languishing in the hospitals for days. And many times, once they were seen, they were released because they didn't necessarily need that level of support. But our police officers are trained, to err on the side of caution, and we're going to transport in the back of a police car. We now are able, when they need to be placed on a hold, to transport through paramedics who have been trained and coached in how to do this in a way that is on a campus, but that keeps the students' information confidential, so they're not pulling up to the front of the school. There's a special place on the campus where these transportations take place, and it has totally changed the way that we operate in Solano. One of the things that we're also looking at right now is our calls. There's been a huge increase this year. So now we have some trend data to look at to start to determine and have conversations with our community about what's happening in the community. And what we're finding is that we definitely need to go back and continue to strengthen our tier 1 supports. How are we identifying these young people early before they need a crisis response? So more work to come, but we definitely wanted to share this information with you. And this is the work and this is the power of breaking barriers. I don't believe that that would have occurred, that this program would have been able to stand up if we were not in space together. If we were not stopping for a moment, pausing in our busy, busy lives to stop and come together and say, what can we do together? How can we work together? How can we build the relationships necessary and the trust to be able to do these huge lifts that we're being asked to do? I also want to call up to the stage a very special young lady. And if for those of you who were not here yesterday, this is a powerhouse right here, this young lady. I cannot wait to see what she does in the future, and I can't wait for you to hear what has done and continues to do to support the youth and our communities. And so she's going to be talking about shared goals. How do we continue to do this work together? So Radha, take it away.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy that I got a platform to talk to everybody with. And yes, as she stated, my presentation or my call to action is about shared goals. So for a moment, I want us all to imagine a world where every young person feels seen, heard, valued, where our dreams and aspirations are acknowledged and actively supported. Today, I want to discuss the power of shared goals. Goals that I not just stated before, but collaboratively defined by our youth members and adult stakeholders. When we share a common goal, we create a powerful force, like a team sport where everyone knows their role and work towards victory. And one of my biggest experiences I had with a shared goal was when I was asked to give testimony for Assembly Bill 2411. The bill was created to establish a behavioral health youth advisory board, like the one I'm on, in every county in California. But what struck me the most about that experience was that an adult approached me rather than the other way around. I'm used to chasing adults, but this was the first time a lobbyist contacted me for my testimony. We talked together about our shared goal, increasing youth voice about our own needs. So I provided the testimony, and the bill did pass. It's not, we don't know, I don't know the details about it, but I did know it passed the assembly. So today, I challenge each of you to commit to this shared vision, to take action, big or small, to move closer to our goals, creating a legacy of opportunity and empowerment for youth. Remember, a shared goal is more than just a statement. It's a promise, a commitment, and a catalyst for positive change. So let's work together to build a brighter future for youth. Thank you.